Hello everyone. Back again with film recaps. In this video, I will recap one of the horror films from 2018, titled Winchester. Before we get to the storyline, I'd like to wish everyone a happy and great day. Without further ado, let's get straight to the storyline. The film opens with a statement claiming that it is inspired by actual events. At the beginning of the film, we are shown a view of a mansion under construction in California, 1906. We see the construction workers tinkering away, even though it's already late at night. Inside a bedroom, a boy named Henry is sleeping together with his mom, Marion. The boy suddenly wakes up and hears a man's voice ominously singing. Later on, the woman is startled awake by the sound of the big bell ringing. She looks surprised to find that the boy is no longer next to her on the bed, and treads through the halls. As she arrives at the corner of the hallway, she comes across a small figure with a bag over their head, and confusedly tries calling her son several times. She then approaches her son and unmasks him. Henry's eyes turn white, and gradually return to normal as he points to the top of the staircase. In the background, we can hear the sounds of heavy footsteps, and wood creaking beyond the ceiling. Early in the morning, we are shown a view of a fancy-looking neighborhood in San Francisco, California. We close in on a house, where a lady and a man are conversing while getting high off laudanum. The man's name is Eric Price, and he works as a psychic doctor. When he turns to look at a painting of a deer, he notices blood dripping from the painting for a split second before it disappears. After that, he proceeds to tell the woman about how the mind can conjure up illusions, and that some people may need help to see the difference between reality and illusion. Later, the doctor hears several knocks on the door, and behind it stands a well-dressed man saying that he is looking for Dr. Price. The man claims that he's offering the doctor employment, and he proceeds to tell him about Mrs. Winchester. She is the widow of the late Mr. Winchester, the Winchester Rifles founder and owner. Mr. Winchester left behind 50% of his company to her upon his death. He tells the doctor that Mrs. Winchester had lost her daughter, and in her grief, has since turned to mediums who may be ripping her off. According to the man, Mrs. Winchester moved to an 8-bedroom house in San Jose, and has spent the last 20 years expanding it since. The house is like a maze and is under constant construction, built under the instructions of the grieving widow. Knowing all this, the board of directors of the Winchester Repeating Arms Company feel the need to send someone to assess Mrs. Winchester's state of mind, to see if she is fit to take over the company. The doctor asks if they plan to take over the company from the woman, but the man claims that he is simply worried about her mental state. Dr. Price is then informed that Mrs. Winchester has agreed to let the doctor stay at her house. He initially hesitates to take the offer, but takes it up upon hearing the sum of money he is getting out of it. Dr. Eric finally grabs the offer and takes off with a carriage, arriving to a view of a huge, lavish mansion surrounded by construction workers. One worker tells him that most rooms don't stay unchanged very long, and that the construction workers are around all day and night. As the doctor waits in the office, the wind harshly blows through the window, knocking over a few sheets of paper. Price moves closer to the moving window, which turns out to be cleaned by the house servant. Not long after, a woman named Marion Marriott walks inside the room and introduces herself as Mrs. Winchester's niece. She tells him that he is to stay in the east wing of the house, and must not disturb Mrs. Winchester's part of the house, and every guest is forbidden from carrying firearms. She shows him to his room while telling him that there are about 100 rooms in the house, and it is easy to get lost. The doctor finds a panel on the wall, with tiny holes labeled with room names. Marion tells him that each hole would reverberate one's voice to a desired room. Before leaving, she tells him she can smell the alcohol in his breath, and that Sarah Winchester would not appreciate him drinking before dinner time. Later in the day, the doctor is taking laudanum while getting ready for dinner with Mrs. Winchester. A picture of a blonde woman inside a locket lies open on the table, and he calls her Ruby. While the doctor looks away, the mirror shifts to an empty chair behind him. He then turns the mirror, but suddenly a creepy face of a man appears behind the mirror. He walks up to the mirror again and tries turning it. But he refuses to believe what he saw, dismissing it as a hallucination. Dr. Price opens the door to leave the room, but is surprised to find a butler there, reminding him that dinner starts in 10 minutes. At dinner, Dr. Price, Marion, and Henry wait at the dining table for Sarah Winchester to arrive. Henry tells Dr. Price that he and her mother moved into the house because his father died. The doctor tries to sympathize by telling Henry that he understands how Henry feels, because he recently lost someone too. A few moments later, the woman arrives at the dining table, and the three guests stand to welcome her. She is Sarah Winchester, owner of the mansion. Dr. Price tries complimenting her by congratulating her on her company's superior firearms. Mrs. Winchester, however, appears cynical to the comment, and seems to despise firearms entirely. Later that night, while everyone is asleep, the doctor takes more laudanum, and thinks of his past conversations with Ruby, his late wife. It turns out that he diagnosed her with a delusional disorder, while she begged him to believe her. We see the doctor toying with a bullet with the writing "Together Forever" engraved on it, and we learn that his past involved an incident with a gunshot. As the clock strikes 12, Dr. Price hears a faint voice coming from one of the holes on the panel in his room. He walks up to it and begins hearing ominous moans from garden room. He tries talking back but hears no answer, so he moves his ear close to one of the holes to listen. Unbeknownst to the doctor, a pale finger sticks out of the hole, but disappears when he turns his head. After that, the doctor puts on his coat and walks out of his room. He hears faint noises of a cupboard opening and walks up to the source of the sound. He then peeks through the curtain to a room, where Sarah Winchester is kneeling while opening a cabinet, taking out a box. As Sarah turns around, the doctor ventures the hallway away from the room, enters a random nearby room and hides inside. Inside the room, he suddenly hears noises coming from the deeper part of the room, so he comes closer to investigate. There, he is shocked by a strange little girl who appears out of nowhere, prompting him to bolt outside. But he still doesn't believe what he saw, saying that he needs some air. On the other side of the house, Henry wakes from his slumber upon hearing strange noises of squeaky wheels rolling about. He tries checking under his bed but finds nothing. Then, out of nowhere, a single roller skate wheels swiftly past him, out of the bedroom. Henry walks towards it to investigate. Back to the doctor, we see him seeing through the gaps of the garden room while saying "déjà vu." He then slips past the construction workers, and tries accessing the garden room from the door by the porch, but to no avail because it is sealed shut. While the doctor tries to look inside, a mysterious figure passes swiftly through the room. He then crosses the front yard, right when he catches the sight of Henry, with a bag over his head, slowly walking to the edge of an exposed. The doctor panics and runs up to catch him, just as Henry jumps down and manages to catch the boy. Dr. Price meets Henry's white eyes, and the boy says "I see you" in a low mature voice. The following morning, Dr. Eric Price meets with Sarah Winchester for the assessment. Mrs. Winchester tells him that she is cursed, because she profits off of a business that causes violence and death. The doctor, however, remains skeptical. Mrs. Winchester asks him if he believes in ghosts and he says no. After that, he begins to try to explain to her how the mind can conjure up illusions, the same exact way he did in the beginning of the film. Mrs. Winchester, however, is offended by this and proceeds to tell him that his laudanum must be confiscated, and that he has to abide by her rules while staying in her house. The doctor is escorted back to his room by a butler, complaining about how he is now confined to quarters in the house. He goes inside his room and opens the pouch, wherein he keeps his laudanum, and finds that it is gone. Irritated, he moves to sit down and opens a letter he found on his desk. It is from the board of directors of the arms company, telling him that they look forward to seeing his assessment. Later that night, the doctor begins making his assessment. He writes that Sarah Winchester appears normal from the outside, but struggles with grief over her husband and daughter's death, and she acts a little aggressive at times. In addition, she suffers from visual hallucinations of shadows or ghosts, for she claims that she is haunted by the ghosts of people who were killed by the firearms her family's company makes. The clock strikes midnight, and as always, the big bell chimes. He tries to look outside the window, where beyond the construction workers wandering about, Mrs. Winchester passes through a hallway in all black and a veil. Curious, the doctor slips out of the window and sneaks past the construction workers to another wing of the house. He continues exploring the dark halls, and finds a doorway slightly ajar. He peeks inside to find Mrs. Winchester drawing a layout of what is presumably a new room. She looks off, as if she is possessed. The candles in the room suddenly blow out, and Mrs. Winchester uncovers her face. Soon after, a figure of a man suddenly appears right in front of the doctor. He then comes across a series of sealed doors bolted shut with nails. Once he's inside his room, he convinces himself that he's been hallucinating, because of his withdrawal from alcohol and laudanum. The next morning, Dr. Price holds another session with Mrs. Winchester. She begins by asking him what it feels like to die. Apparently, the doctor had died for an entire 3 minutes from a gunshot before being revived. Mrs. Winchester shows him a shelf where she keeps track of every single person killed by a Winchester rifle. The doctor pulls out a bullet from his pocket, and tells her that this was the bullet that killed him. He keeps it and has refurbished it. Mrs. Winchester tells him that individuals who have died can see ghosts, and asks Dr. Price if he's ever seen one, to which he says no. Mrs. Winchester claims that the spirits killed by the rifle guides her to create building plans, and that is why she keeps renovating the house, and that she is building rooms for shadows with unfinished business. When it's midnight, the bell chimes call to them, and they communicate with her through the drawing. They want her to reconstruct the rooms that they died in, and she claims that last night, a spirit more powerful than any she ever encountered endangered her family. After that, Mrs. Winchester is conversing with the foreman, Mr. Hanson, about a new room design. She asks him to ship every type of the Winchester rifle to display in the room. Mrs. Winchester then explains that she builds the rooms to the spirit's liking, to express her deep remorse, and after the spirits reconcile and move on, she tears the rooms apart and rebuild for new spirits. Some spirits, however, do not respond favorably, and she seals them in with 13 nails on each of these rooms' door. She claims that she releases them once they've made peace with their situation, as disturbed souls tend to prey on the innocent, like Henry. Mrs. Winchester tells him that the doctor can help her bridge the gap, but Dr. Price tells her he doesn't believe her. Mrs. Winchester tells Dr. Price to make the assessment right away, even if that means deeming her crazy and she has to lose her share of the company. She doesn't seem bothered by it and says that there are far greater things to lose. Later on, the doctor is outside while the workers are unloading boxes of Winchester rifles, to put inside the new room. The doctor tries talking to the foreman, saying that it is possible that Mrs. Winchester is just an elderly woman wanting to fancy up her mansion. The foreman, however, responds grimly and disagrees. The doctor then asks him if he could get access to the garden room because he had one just like it, to which the foreman says no, insisting that the room must remain sealed. Later that night, Dr. Price visits Marion's room to check on Henry, who is currently resting. The two converse outside the bedroom about the manner of Henry's late father's death. Marion tells Dr. Price that her husband succumbed to his demons, that was his alcoholism. They then hear noises coming from inside the bedroom, and enter to find Henry no longer in bed. In the firearm-filled room, we see an unshown figure take a rifle from its display shelf. Meanwhile, Mrs. Winchester is wandering around her house when she sees Henry holding a rifle. Marion and Dr. Price hears the gunshot from the bedroom.
Henry.
Marion and Dr. Price then snag him away, and holds him down. They put the unconscious Henry back to the bedroom, and Dr. Price suggests that Henry must be taken to a doctor, but Mrs. Winchester refuses. She then walks out of the room, and tells the foreman to seal door to the bedroom right then with 13 nails. Inside the bedroom, Dr. Price, Marion, and Henry are startled to find the wardrobe shaking. Dr. Price goes to open it, and sees Mr. Winchester walks out of it with the foreman, revealing that there is a secret door behind the wardrobe. Having enough of the superstitious mumbo-jumbo, Dr. Price takes it upon himself to call his employer and ask him to summon an ambulance. After he hangs up, Dr. Price happens upon a butler. The doctor asks the butler to help him retrieve his suitcase. On the way to his room, the butler tells him that in this house, he's seen spirits of people who met violent ends thanks to the rifles. He tells Dr. Price that Dr. Price has seen these ghosts too, but Price remains in his denial. The butler tells him that taking Marion and Henry away from the house will not solve anything, because they are Winchesters and they're all going to die. When the doctor turns around, she is shocked to see the butler's face turns gruesome. He staggers back the stairs to find that the butler has led him to the stairs that leads nowhere. Irritated, Dr. Price goes to find Mrs. Winchester, and wants to tell her about what has just happened. He points at a picture in an article, and says that the man in the picture works in the building and he just threatened the Winchester family. Mrs. Winchester hands him the paper and tells him to read it. As he read it, he finds that the man was a corporal, who was killed in Winchester Repeating Arms General Office 20 years ago. His name was Benjamin Block and his brothers were killed by Winchester rifles, so he went to the Winchester Repeating Arms office to seek revenge.
Ben swore revenge.
He killed 15 innocent people that day. Moreover, he locked himself in the display room, and begins singing to himself while waiting for the police to arrive. Police officers stormed in the building and shot Ben dead with their Winchesters. Mrs. Winchester and the foreman take Dr. Price to the new room, which is the exact replica of the room Ben died in. Mrs. Winchester tells him that when the bell chimes at midnight, Ben will be at his most powerful and tells Dr. Price to believe. But he remains to be in denial. Mrs. Winchester suddenly feels Ben's presence in the room, so she begins pacing while apologizing for the deaths of Ben's brothers. She asks him to leave this house and find peace. Meanwhile, Henry, Marion, and the other butler are in the bedroom, when Henry starts singing the same exact song as what was being sung by Ben seconds before he died. Suddenly, the wardrobe rattles again, and its door swigs open on its own. Soon after, the entire house begins to shake, causing the rifles to fall out of their display cases and several pieces of furniture to fall over. The foreman tries to reach for Mrs. Winchester, when he is suddenly yanked backwards and dragged outside. The entire front wing of the house then collapses atop him, killing him instantly. Dr. Price reaches for Mrs. Winchester, but he is also dragged away from the room. As he ends up lying in the main hall, the nails that are pinned to the sealed doors are taking themselves off one by one. The doctor calls for Mrs. Winchester and looks for a way to get to her.
I'll find another.
Back in the bedroom, the butler is now lying dead amid the rubbles, while Henry's singing can be heard in the background. On his way around, Dr. Price sees a sign for the gardens room, and then finds an entrance to the garden room. As he manages to take off the nails and the seal, he finds a rocking chair inside, rocking slowly on its own. He then hears Ruby's voice and realizes that Mrs. Winchester has built an exact replica of his garden room. He then turns around and finds Ruby standing there. Still in disbelief, he begins going on about how the voices are not real, while Ruby cries while telling him that he never believed her. It is at this point that we find out why Dr. Price had died for 3 minutes before. His 3-minute death occurred when he attempted to intervene in his wife's suicide attempt, but was fatally shot by the gun she was holding. Following the shooting of Dr. Price, his wife committed suicide, believing that he had died. Dr. Price is plagued by guilt as a result of that incident, which he has carried with him until now. Ruby then tells him that he should let go of his guilt, so she can let go of hers, and see the truth. He then wakes up and finds himself surrounded by a dozen different figures staring at him. He realizes that they are all ghosts of the people shot by Winchester rifles. A Native American man points at the door, signaling him to walk out. Dr. Price is led to the stairs that leads nowhere, and left with the nails by one of them. He begins tearing open the ceiling at the end of the staircase, and climbs into the room above. As he enters the room, he finds Mrs. Winchester sitting at the end of the room. In fact, Dr. Price was chosen by Winchester because he had been killed by Winchester's gun for 3 minutes. Dr. Price, inadvertently, has some kind of connection with the evil spirits present, and can also see the spirits killed by Winchester's weapons. Dr. Price tells Mrs. Winchester that they need to find Henry and Marion, but she proceeds to tell him to seal the door across from them, saying that Ben must not leave. Still treading through the halls, Marion calls for Henry, while hearing her son still chanting the same song in the background. She then finds Henry at the end of the room and embraces him, though his eyes appear white and empty. Meanwhile, Dr. Price has just finished nailing the door shut upstairs. He then tells Sarah Winchester that he can see all of the ghosts in the house, and that he finally believes her. At this point, Mrs. Winchester explains that Marion and Henry are in great danger, and begins to plead Ben to leave her family alone. Ben moves away from possessing Henry and now possesses Mrs. Winchester. He starts yelling about how he's going to murder her entire family. After Ben's spirit comes out of her body, Mrs. Winchester senses that Ben's spirit is afraid of something in the room. She considers the possibility that Ben is afraid of the Winchester weapon that he used to kill. Mrs. Winchester then asks Dr. Price to seal that entrance shut with 13 nails. At the same time, the house bells then ring, signaling that it is 12 o'clock in the night, and Ben's spirit power grows stronger than usual by the time midnight arrives. As a result, Mrs. Winchester is attacked by Ben's spirit once more, and thrown into a cupboard. As she is strangled by Ben, Dr. Price quickly takes Winchester's gun and shoots Ben, but is unable to kill him. Mrs. Winchester then believes that Ben's spirit might be afraid of something else. Dr. Price then remembers about his bullet, which could be the item that Ben is afraid of. He loads the bullet into his rifle, but when he wants to shoot Ben, the spirit vanishes. He then closes his eyes, and when he opens them, he sees Ben, and shoots the spirit right away. After successfully shooting Ben, the spirit finally vanishes and returns to his realm in peace, reunited with his two brothers. The other spirits go back to their rooms, and they both make it safely out of the house where they find Marion and Henry. Before the film ends, Dr. Eric Price finally writes his final assessment of Sarah Winchester, wherein he states that Mrs. Winchester are within a sound mind and body and she is fit to resume her role in the Winchester Repeating Arms Company, for as long as she desires. He visits the garden room one last time and says his goodbyes to his wife. Outside, construction workers are moving on and about to fix the damages, and finally to take apart the garden room. Dr. Price asks Mrs. Winchester what she's going to do next, and she simply says she's going to rebuild. The movie ends with a shot of a nail unscrewing itself from a seal. Right before the credits, we are shown a closing statement that details the true events of the film. Okay guys. That's all the recap for Winchester 2018. Thanks for watching. See you again in the next video.